You know what's really interesting? It's kind of ironic that I named this channel Luxander, which is my name, with the intention of having it be a channel that's just about anything I want it to be about. Oh my god, the eczema under my eye is looking crazy. Sorry. Uh, and yet, I have gotten locked into talking about political content. Like, the channel might as well be named Trans Political Content. Even though the goal was like, oh, I want to be able to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And then, like, I literally started a second channel so that I can talk about, like, archery. See my arrows down there? There's also a fishing pole. It's kind of hard to see the fishing pole because it's behind my arrows. But, yeah, like, I literally felt like I had to start a second channel in order to talk about the things that I want to really talk about because this I mean, it's interesting. Like, on this channel, I wonder if it's like the non-political, like, I wonder if non-political content would do better because the thing that I'm always struggling with is like, oh, I tried to talk about something else political and it didn't work out. Like, I tried to talk about mask bans and that video did shit this week, even though I think that's really important. Like, okay, maybe you don't want to wear a mask. Maybe you don't care about catching COVID. Maybe you don't care about the possibility of being permanently bedbound from a COVID infection. Check out Physics Girl if you don't believe me on that. But like, I care. I should be able to go to the grocery store wearing a mask. Why? Like, it shouldn't be illegal. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is I'm going to talk about The Last of Us. Because I watched the first 6 episodes of The Last of Us last night, and I have some commentary. So prepare for that. Wow. Uh, and I guess I could have saved this video until after I had watched all 8 episodes. Or 9? There are 9? Yeah, because I finished 6 and there's 3 more. Um, I didn't know how many there were until I just now checked right before I started recording this video. So, um, wow, what an interesting show. I mean, I'm watching it mostly because I like Pedro Pascal, and I mean, it was a highly acclaimed show, and I found that it does keep the attention. Some really bold decisions. Some of the beats are kind of predictable, partially because I was witness to the memes during the heyday of the show, and partially just because, like, I mean, I like once you start to get a flavor for film language, you can be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is gonna happen next, or like maybe that's gonna happen next. Sometimes I'm wrong, but you know, it's like you start out and like you get the initial, okay, the start of the zombie apocalypse, like, and it's good. It's an interesting play on the zombie genre, even though, like, obviously I know that HBO was like, don't use the Z word. Oh, do not. No, no, no. Um, but obviously that is still fundamentally what it is. Like, it's a zombie genre apocalypse thing. So you had the initial, okay, he's got a daughter. Like, I know that the daughter isn't in the show later based on all the memes. Like, he's with Ellie and not this girl, so presumably she doesn't make it. I didn't expect her to get shot by a police person. By the way, spoilers, obviously. Um, like, in that first episode, they're trying to escape from. And it's interesting too. Like, it happens all at once, which they kind of go into a few episodes later in the show. They discuss, like, how did this happen all at once? Typically in zombie movies, you have this gradual spread, but the rationale that they give is that, like, okay, so you do see, in Indonesia, a mycologist discussing this, one of the very first outbreaks of this, and one of the primary ways that we think of this being spread is through bites, which is, again, like, that's a very typical zombie genre thing, but it also is theorized within universe that it was spread by people consuming flour or sugar. Joel says or sugar, but we know that it was some workers in a flour factory in Indonesia that were among the first affected by this. So the idea is that they've created a contaminated product and then it's shipped out everywhere all over the world. Now, like, I don't know that it really makes sense for this to be as coordinated as it was. Like, there were probably smaller scale outbreaks first, but then, like, it was like exponential because flour is in so many different things. Obviously, flour is a thickener. So it'll be like you'll buy like a sauce off the shelf and flour will be in it, and cereal and bread, and Joel mentions pancake mix. He's like telling Ellie about it, and he says it kind of quietly, pancake mix, because in the first episode his daughter is like trying to make him a birthday breakfast, which, by the way, up for the apocalypse to happen on your birthday. Like, oh my god. um but he just sort of softly is like, we could have gotten sick by eating pancake mix on my birthday. Although I quibble a little bit, because I think that if you cook it out, it should hypothetically neutralize it. But I guess the entire premise of the thing is that, what if fungus had a reason to, like, there's a scene in the very, very prologue where it's like, what if fungus had a reason to evolve to tolerate higher temperatures? Because that's why we don't currently have, I mean, humans can get certain fungal infections, but like usually it's like ringworm or something like on the outside of our bodies. um like if it were it's like they just can't tolerate higher temperatures inside our bodies. So there is like a little bit of a climate change implication. I mean, it states it outright, basically. Well, no, it's like it's kind of implied that if they, if fungus had a reason to evolve for higher temperatures, then it sort of relies on the audience understanding global climate change. That the interview was given in 1968, and we already knew about climate change at that point. Like, there were authors in in the late 1800s who were talking about how massive output of pollutants was going to cause a greenhouse effect and therefore increase the temperature and up the entire ecosystem. But there's like in 1968 this interview, and it is relying on the implication of like, oh, we are experiencing evolutionary pressures for fungus to live in higher temperatures. But we're talking about a difference of like, oh, this thing can survive in 70, 80 degrees outside the body, and now it's evolved to tolerate 97 or 98 degrees inside our bodies. Does that really mean that this fungus is capable of surviving, like, being baked in bread or being fried on the stove? Those are higher temperatures for longer periods, especially with the bread. So that's just a little bit of a quibble. And I will say another quibble before I start going on about how amazing this show is. The opening credits heavily features slime molds, which are not molds, and they are also not fungus. So that's just a little pet peeve of mine as a person who is probably more interested in biology than the average person. But it's fine. Like, I can skip it, and I watched it in the first episode. I was like, ooh, what's the opening thing of this like? Can you focus on me? Thank you. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, now I don't need to keep watching this, because I assume it's not like the Game of Thrones opening or the House of the Dragon opening, where it changes each time, or it could change each time. I do have comments about the House of the Dragon opening, but we're going to leave that for a different video. I'm trying to decide whether, like, we'll find out today whether this video does well, because I'm like, maybe I should just post these kind of off the cuff videos about whatever on my Patreon. But this is the question, is like, can I post on my main channel about something other than politics and have it do decent numbers? Because that opens me up. That opens up the possibilities. That means that I can do media analysis videos on this channel, and that instead of just letting this channel gradually die as I get tired of talking about politics, like, maybe I could shift. into something that doesn't make me want to pull my hair out. Anyway, so bold decisions are made in this show, I believe. Um, like, particularly that third episode. I know it was highly controversial at the time. I didn't realize that the gay episode was just it's a movie. It's its own movie that could make sense completely out of the context of the show. Like, of course, we know who Joel is. So when, like, Joel starts to be friends with these people, like, you understand through the narrative, like, who he is and what he's about, and the fact that he's trying to take Ellie there to I think he's basically like, they'll take care of, he's like basically planning on dumping Ellie with them, is kind of what it seemed like when he was talking to Tess. That was the other sort of predictable thing. I was like, Tess is definitely gonna die, like, for sure Tess is gonna die. And then she did. So I was like, she's gonna get infected. um and yeah, so the gay episode, oh my god, it was so good. First of all, I thought it was hilarious that this guy, the one played by Nick Offerman, Bill, he's got all these like, it's 2003. He's got all these Panasonic, like the old yellow plastic security cameras. Like, this guy had the highest available consumer technology at the time, I think. And he's hiding out in his bunker. He's like, "You New World Order won't get me." Hilarious. Like, he's a prepper, or what he calls it, a survivalist. Um, and yeah, I just love that. He's like, "I'm gonna booby trap this entire town." I love the concept that if your town gets evacuated and there's like basically no rule of law anymore because the government has concentrated itself into fascist like camps, literally, that it's a free for all. He can just go to Home Depot and take all their shit. How amazing would that be? If you're like, I am now going to booby trap my entire neighborhood and, like, protect myself long term, and like, I can just go loot Home Depot. Wow. Love it. Amazing. No notes. And then, yeah, the beautiful love story. I think that Frank was a little bit forward, of being like, I am going to have sex with you now. And like, I have decided that I am going to stay here. And just so bold, just like forcing his way into Bill's life almost. But it was really sweet, like playing music at the piano. Um, like, I was like, oh yeah, when are we gonna get past this? Like, while I was watching it, because I didn't realize that's the entire episode is an hour and a half long film, or maybe more than an hour and a half. It's a film about these two men finding love in the apocalypse and going, how, Bill is a very practical man. You can see it, as soon as Frank shows up and he goes over to the mantle and he like wipes the film of dust off the mantle. Like, Bill does not look around at his surroundings. He does not think about aesthetics. He does not consider like the potential health implications of leaving a thick layer of dust on everything in your home. And then Frank comes in and there's like tension and frustration between them, regarding, like, I mean, you can go steal paint from the Home Depot, okay? Listen, you can go steal paint from the Home Depot. It's not going to hurt your resource management otherwise to let Frank paint the goddamn house. Like, let Frank paint the house, Bill. Uh, and then, yeah, just such a tragic end to that love story. I mean, it's beautiful. It's tragic, but it's beautiful. I haven't looked up, like, what does Frank have? What does Frank, nope, that's not how you spell that word. I'm typing one-handed. Have in The Last of Us. Unspecified neuromuscular disorder. Okay, cool. I was thinking it was MS, but they didn't want to be specific with it. So he has a like neurodegenerative disorder, and he's like, his hands aren't working very well. Not he like even to paint. Like his hands aren't working, he can't walk, he's in a wheelchair, and he's like, dude, there wasn't even a cure for this before the world ended. Like, what do you think is going to happen now? So, he feels that his quality of life has deteriorated seriously. And he's like, I feel like you could have given Bill a little bit of warning, though. I feel like you could have been like, hey, let's have one more week. And so I'll give you like a week to mentally prepare for me committing suicide. But yeah, he was like, as of today, I'm done. Like, as of now, as of this moment, I am done. Capital D. Um, so yeah, and it's just beautiful. Like, you know, there's also the scene with the strawberry patch where Bill is like, I was never afraid. It's so emotional. He was like, I was never afraid before you were here because, like, he didn't have anything to protect. He didn't really have anything to live for. He was just like, I'm going to survive. But then, like, the concept of having something to protect, having something to orient your life around after being alone for 4 years, like, it was 4 years before he met Frank. Like, 4 years of the world ended in one day. So, yeah, it's just really beautiful that, like, Frank is like, yeah, I'm ready to die. I want to kill myself. Like, I'm done. And Bill's like Frank, I think, had a sense of purpose outside of the relationship. He's like, I'm gonna fix up the town. Like, this is what I'm going to do to not lose my sanity. I don't know what Bill's doing. Like, I think Bill is just constantly improving security. Like, that's his thing. But Frank is like, I need purpose. It's just the two of us. We can't sit and talk every day. I need to do things. I need hobbies. So he's like, I'm gonna paint the house and I'm gonna improve buildings in our neighborhood as well. Like, I'm gonna improve the boutique. Like, he's like, I need something to do with my time. And then he later takes up painting, and he's got some really beautiful paintings. But then for Bill, because he didn't have anything specific that he was living for before Frank came along, when Frank is like, I'm done, he's like, Bill goes, well, there goes my purpose. Like, my entire reason for being alive since you came here has been to love you and protect you. And for that to be taken away from him, like, he does not want to go back to his life of that previous 4 years where he's just living for the sake of living. Like, the flavor would be gone from life for him. And so yeah, they make this beautiful romantic end. And of course, Frank doesn't know that Bill plans to join him until after they've already consumed the pills. Um, and yeah, I knew that, I guess I didn't know that it was them two, but I did know about the letter that was like, hey, we left the window open. Please don't enter the bedroom. We didn't want to stink up the whole house, but we don't want you to see us decomposing effectively. Yeah, just one of the most beautiful love stories I have seen, and it's an episode of a zombie show. Like, such a bold decision for them to go, for the writers to be like, yeah, we're gonna dedicate an entire episode of this zombie show to a romantic tragedy, effectively, a gay romantic tragedy. I Yeah, I don't know if it would have changed the substance if it had been a man and a woman. I think it would have. Like, I think that there are quintessential things about the story that only work because it's a gay couple. Um, and I really, really loved it, and I really appreciate it. And I realize that I'm late. I'm like more than a year late on this show, but I didn't have HBO Max until House of the Dragon. And I was like, oh, I'm paying for this. Maybe I should watch some other shows on here now. And The Last of Us has been like pretty high on my list of things that I should get around to doing. Um, Obviously, we love the Communism episode, and I had seen that meme before where Joel finally meets up with his brother Tommy, and Tommy is like, "It's not like that. We're not communists." And then his wife Maria is like, "This is literally a commune. We are literally communists. Like nobody owns anything, or everything is owned collectively, rather." Um, and it's just a sweet little life that they've made there. And I hope that it doesn't get up. Like, again, I have 3 episodes left in the show, and I don't know if they're going to make a season 2. I haven't actually looked into that. That's another good question. Are they making. I'm sorry. I just need to answer this question. Season 2 of The Last of Us. Google knows what I want. Okay, yeah, so there have been teasers and casting announcements as of July 2nd, 2024. I'm looking at an article from Digital Spy. The latest update came from show co-creators Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, who revealed the episode count with a confirmation that the second run will span 7 episodes. Cool. Okay, so there is going to be a season 2. Nice. Something to look forward to. Wow. But yeah, so I don't know if I hope that the commune doesn't get all messed up. That would be a huge bummer. And I think that I know from the internet and the fact that it's impossible to avoid spoilers. Like, I think Joel just died. There was this whole. Joel starts having panic attacks because he feels like he cannot do anything right. He feels like he keeps failing. He failed his daughter. He failed Tess. Like, he's just failing, 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 failing. And if Ellie weren't immune to the cordyceps, she would be dead also, because she has been bitten on his watch, like at the same time that Tess was bitten. So yeah, like, it's very lucky that you know she's immune, because otherwise, yeah, he would have failed her as well. And he's constantly worried about her and like trying to teach her stuff. uh but he was so concerned that if he went with her they're trying to hook up with the Fireflies, and they try to go to the University of Colorado, Eastern Colorado University, whatever, something like that. And they this is the last episode that I've seen, is he goes with her instead of sending her with Tommy, because he's like, Tommy can hear. Joel's like partially deaf in his right ear, and it has gotten them in trouble before. Um, and so he's like, I'm physically not capable of protecting you in the same way that I want to, and I'm worried that I'm gonna fail you and you're gonna get seriously hurt. And then he dies, question mark. Like, it kind of seems like he dies. uh I mean, he got shivved, and the shiv part that entered his body was like, oh, it's only like 3 inches, but that's a perforated bowel right there. And if you don't have a hospital, how are you going to recover from that? He goes into shock. He falls off the horse. um I don't know that he necessarily lost enough blood to die, but you can die from going into shock. Like, your body is just like, oh no, and it just kind of stops working. Uh, and he's old and he's been through a lot of stuff, so it seems to me as though he probably died. And I do think that is it's in the memes, or that Pedro Pascal gave an interview or something about like not making it all the way through the season. I don't know, I can't remember, but the show has existed for a while out in the public eye, and it's not a show that I was heavily invested in, so I wasn't like desperately trying to avoid spoilers the way that I desperately try to avoid spoilers with House of the Dragon. Well, I know a lot of shit that's going to happen in House of the Dragon, because before the show came out, I was like watching videos that were like, well, this is what happens in the book. And so I'm like, oh, okay, these two characters are going to die in some kind of altercation together, but then the way that it goes down in the show is dramatically different. But anyway, I wasn't like desperately trying to avoid like The Last of Us spoilers, because I was like, okay, maybe I'll eventually get around to watching it. I don't care. And then I watched it, and it's so good. Also, shout out, very cool that one of the 2 of the episodes take place in Kansas City, which is where ya boy is from. Um, I don't. I'm not like, I don't actually know where they filmed it though. It definitely had Kansas City vibes, but I am not sure where they actually filmed it. So that's a question that I have. Um, and it's interesting that the Kansas City Fedra, the government has like a reputation for being particularly brutal, even though all of the Fedra is like fairly brutal. But that kind of makes a lot of sense. Like Kansas City has a ton of low income black and brown people. So it kind of makes sense that that city in particular would like have a high degree of exploitation just on account of like who the people are that are being ruled. Because the the feds will feel like a permissiveness to treat the people however they want if they are othered in that way, where it's like if you're around mostly white people, you're probably going to treat them a little bit better. I'm not sure if those demographics are reflected in the show, but that's just me, like personally, like I'm literally from there, so I know the demos, and so yeah, it's just interesting to me that like Kansas City has a reputation for being particularly brutal, and they get overthrown effectively by these people who are tired of that shit after 20 years. Um, I did think it was very funny. This is kind of rolling back a little bit to the episode 3, but Frank is like, oh yeah, you're this guy who's like 9/11 was an inside job and the government is all fascist. And Bill's like, the government is all fascist. And Frank's like, well, they weren't before. But it's like, yeah, I mean, if you follow this channel and you know anything about anything, we already live in a fascist nation. We're already living in an occupied nation. It's just like this is an extreme version where like the government will use disasters as an excuse to ramp up breaches of privacy, like breaches of trust. Like the Patriot Act exists and they can surveil us, like they can listen in on our conversations. There it's like a meme now, the joke of like, hello, my personal FBI agent. Are like hopefully you're not going blind from this porn that I'm watching or whatever, it's like a joke, it's a meme. But the reality is that our government uses disasters as an excuse to overreach their authority. And this is just an extreme version of that where they're like, well, we can justify, creating quarantine zones, the QZs, as they call them in the show. And they're supposed to be safe in that they're safe from infected, but like, you're having to toil. They execute people for leaving the QZ, and like, again, it can make sense to some degree to have very strict rules. But if they have a little thing and they can just tell whether you're infected and then kill you anyway, then like, why would they need to execute people who come back and are healthy? Like, is it that great of a risk? If anything, you're creating conditions where people will sneak back in after having been infected rather than having like an official, I don't want, like, let's just say immigration for shorthand, like an immigration checkpoint thing where like everybody comes through in a protocol kind of way. Like everybody comes through, like, let's say they're allowed to leave temporarily. Like, what about people who want to travel from one QZ to another, right? Like exactly the whole thing of the whole premise of the first season, as far as I've seen it. Like obviously we meet Tommy halfway through the season, but Joel is trying to get to Tommy, who is ostensibly in another QZ across the country. Yeah, so like all of these restrictions actually create conditions for people to potentially put everyone at risk. Like if there were an official process that said, okay, you can leave to gather resources or whatever, and then you can come back and we'll give you a little thing and check if you have the cordyceps, then like, okay, that is gonna reduce the likelihood of bad shit happening. But like setting, it's also a great example politically. This It's funny, this has ended up becoming a political discussion even though it's a discussion about a show that I enjoyed watching yesterday. But this is also a great example of how increasing the punishment for a crime doesn't serve as a deterrent. You know, if it's a crime to leave the QZ, and it's a crime punishable by death to leave the QZ, which, you know, maybe there is some kind of official process, but that because Joel and Tess are smugglers, maybe they just are like, it can't be official. I mean, and obviously, I recognize that Ellie is um, infected, and so they need to go outside of an official process. But they don't know that at the beginning. They don't know that. Why is it that they can't seek permission? Like, oh, let's just say we're taking our daughter to a different QZ. We want to go meet our family in a different QZ. There is no official process for it, as far as I can tell. But yeah, like, you don't really stop crime by increasing the punishment. Like, if the punishment for this crime is death, that's not going to stop people from doing it. You know, there have been societies in the past where the punishment for stealing is death, like stealing food, for example. And, you know, that's not going to stop people stealing food if they don't have food and if they don't have the means to produce it, or like if they don't have the means to get a job and support themselves and then buy the food, or if their housing is costing so much that they're prioritizing that and they are going without food. You know, people are desperate. You know, this is people are impoverished in the QZs, and they do this menial work like throwing bodies into the fire pit and cleaning out the sewer and stuff, and they're like getting I think part of it also is like kind of a criticism of the fact that capitalism still exists. You know, that the world has fallen apart and we're still doing capitalism. We're still doing, you have to work and earn a certain number of cards, I guess is what they call them, like credits basically. You have to earn a certain number of credits and then use that to get food or alcohol or other resources. You know, like the idea that, you know, the global economy is gone. There is no trade between QZs, as far as I can tell. I mean, to some extent, I guess. Like there's like a factory in Florida that produces pills and bullets, is what they say in the show. And then in Boston, they have some of these pills, and like, you know, it like creates so many conditions of poverty that we can see, like the fact that Joel, he made a joke, or his daughter actually made a joke in the first episode about like, oh, she sells hard drugs and that's how she got the money to fix his watch. And then he is selling hard drugs. Like, he is a drug dealer because he has to be, because he does not make enough money doing essential services for the QZ, right? And it's just wild that in like that we at that point, like, it's because the US government is still involved, but that there is such a lack of imagination on how things work. In the commune, we see that they trade. You know, Tommy gets Joel a new pair of boots and he's like, hey, I traded for these. Or no. Yeah, it's something like that. He's like, I traded for these. Saved you the trouble of reshoeing your own shoes. Like like replacing the sole of the shoes. Uh so like we can clearly see like that's two different options. And we should be thinking about this in our world, because while it is, I guess, considerably less likely that a parasitic fungus will infect all of us in a zombie way where we're then killing and eating each other. Um, like, the society that we live in is not necessarily going to exist in the way that we understand it to for much longer. Like, this is one of those things that I talk about on the channel and it makes me seem like a conspiracy theorist. I have looked into the data about climate change, and like climate change is the thing that is going to collapse our society more so than anything. There will be food shortages, or like food will become dramatically more expensive, and then what are you going to do if you can't afford food the same way anymore? We already live in a system where there are people, I've seen people on Reddit talking about how they taught themselves how to hunt rabbit and forage some edible things near their home because they cannot afford groceries. You know, like housing is more expensive. So um yeah, it is just kind of an indictment on like the ways that capitalism are going to continue to try to perpetuate itself through like a societal collapse. And either we're going to live in a situation where there's a military dictatorship and there's you have to do menial labor for scraps and then resort to selling drugs and smuggling to actually try to get to a point where you can make ends meet or improve your material conditions, because that is kind of the premise in the first couple episodes, is like they're trying to get something that most people don't have, which is like a truck and a truck battery, in order to go find Tommy. And so that's like they're trying to improve from the baseline material conditions, and it ends up being ineffective because this is a desperate situation where you have people who f each other over, um, because it's a necessity, versus the commune where they are safe, they are secure, they have everything that they need. They even have like the stark contrast between the QZ and the fact that there are a bunch of people presumably voluntarily gathered to watch an execution, like that and like drinking themselves until their face stops hurting. Those are like the primary forms of entertainment in the QZ, like as far as what we can see, or like going back to your apartment and reading or whatever. Like there is no life worth living in the QZ. But then we go to the commune and they have a movie theater and they have a big off Christmas tree in the middle of town and they sing, and like they have a life that is worth being alive for under a system where presumably labor is expected of you to an extent, but it's not like you have to do it for money or like for housing. That like housing is provided for you because it's considered a basic need, and you presumably don't have to trade for food. That's just given to you. Like they go into the mess hall pretty early on in that episode, or pretty early on when they go to the commune, and they don't have to give anything to get food. Food is a given. Versus like, I think, and they don't even have to pay anything for the alcohol either. They go into the bar and they're just drinking and they don't have to pay for it. Like certain basic things are just accounted for. If you need a pair of boots, you might have to trade for it, but mostly things are freely given and shared. And I do think that that's a really excellent contrast and a really excellent model of viewing the difference between a system that still desperately tries to cling to this capitalistic idea that you must earn your luxuries or you must earn a place to live, rather than it being like, yeah, everybody knows that human beings want to drink alcohol. We've done it for literally like tens of thousands of years. We've been distilling and making out. Maybe distilling is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Like we've been producing alcohol and consuming it. There's like, it's even theorized that cities and agriculture exist because originally we were trying to produce alcohol. That the system of agriculture. Oh, hold on. Okay, yeah, sorry. My phone was like, the file is too large. It will continue in a new file. I'm like, okay, cool. Now I do have to edit this together a little bit. Um, but yeah, like I just think that it's so fascinating that this show chose to make such a strong political decision. And I don't know if that's based on the game at all. I haven't seen the game. I haven't played it myself. But yeah, so like on top of this being just a really excellent show that's well written and well acted, and there's all these great action scenes and all this great tension, like personal tension, and we're heavily invested in how much Joel cares for Ellie beyond the fact that she could provide a cure. Like I don't even know that he genuinely believes that she could provide a cure, or more that it's like, oh, okay, this is our excuse to keep traveling together. Because he loves her. She's like the same age that his daughter was. Uh, and of course, Ellie is a hilarious character. Like, I don't even, I don't need to go into how like the puns bring so much levity to the show. Like, the show honestly is way funnier than I expected it to be. Even without the puns, obviously that's a big part of it. But I just think the show is so funny, as well as making several very interesting and important political points. So I didn't expect this video to be 40 minutes long, and I'm expecting that people will not watch it. So I am going to stop talking now. I've just spent like 40 minutes of today yapping about this, and now I'm going to go do laundry or something. So if you've listened this far, thank you for listening. And, like, subscribe, comment, roll the Patreon credits since I have to edit this thing anyway now. Okay, bye.
Last month was Pride, now it's time for Wrath. Thank you so much to my patrons, including Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Jack, Amanda B., Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Pasnell Infinity, Suzanne Maynard, Sojo, Jamie Jam, Dizzy Quiche, Jericho, Kevin Young, Liam Hodgson, Athiet, Elavie Nobody, Mr. Atheist, Elizabeth Bartell, Celeste, Nova, and Michelle Frattaroli.